Rain lashed the windows of the Alderwick shipping office as Duke Julian Ashcombe-Reyne stood over a ledger he prayed his wife would never see. Thunder cracked over the Northumberland harbour, and somewhere beyond the fogged glass, the masts of 100 trading vessels groaned against their moorings like restless animals. Julian did not hear them. He heard only the scratch of his own pen, closing a debt that did not officially exist. "Your Grace!" Silas Boone, the estate steward, stood in the doorway, dripping. Sir Edmund Talbot's man was asking questions at the harbour master's office. About the Alderwick mortgage. Julian's pen stopped. "Which mortgage?" he said carefully. "Would that be?" Boone did not answer. He did not need to. There was only one mortgage that mattered. The one Julian had signed in secret 8 months ago. The one that had saved his sister's husband from Newgate and his family from scandal. The one his wife, the Duchess Margaret, believed did not exist. Outside, a carriage lamp swung wildly in the wind, throwing light across the harbour wall. And for one moment, Julian saw her. Margaret, standing at the office door, soaked through, watching him through the glass with an expression he had never seen on her face before. She had heard everything. The storm had found its way inside. He hid the truth to protect his family. She built a secret of her own to protect herself. "Only one of them will survive what happens next," comment Duchess, "if you think Margaret should walk away, or Duke, if you think love deserves a second chance. Watch till the end. The final twist will leave you speechless." Subscribe now, because this story is about to get ruthless. The Alderwick townhouse smelled of beeswax and wet wool when Margaret arrived home, an hour behind Julian, her boots ruined, her hair plastered to her neck. She said nothing to the footman who took her cloak. She said nothing to Mrs. Prynne, who hovered in the hallway with a question already forming on her lips. She climbed the stairs and shut the door of her sitting room and stood very still, listening to her own heartbeat. 3 years of marriage, and she had believed she knew the shape of her husband's mind. Julian had married her for reasons he considered practical, and she had once considered romantic. Her father's shipping fortune, her own quiet competence, a match that pleased both families, and, she had thought, both hearts. He was not a cruel man. He was, if anything, too careful, the kind of man who believed that a burden shared was a burden doubled, and so he carried everything alone, including, apparently, debts large enough to require secret mortgages against land that was not entirely his to mortgage. She had married a partner. She had gotten a guardian. Downstairs, Julian paced his study, aware that the silence in the house had teeth. He had spent 8 months constructing an elaborate architecture of protection, protecting Eleanor from her husband's gambling debts, protecting the estate from public disgrace, protecting Margaret, he told himself, from worry she did not need to carry. He had not once asked whether she wanted to be protected. His sister Eleanor's marriage had nearly collapsed into debtor's prison the previous winter, a fact known to exactly 4 people in England, and Julian intended to keep it that way. He had signed the mortgage in March, in a solicitor's office in Newcastle, under a name close enough to his own that the paperwork would pass unremarked unless someone went looking. Sir Edmund Talbot had gone looking. Talbot had wanted the Alderwick harbour contracts for 11 years, ever since Julian's father had outbid him for the northern dock leases. He was patient, wealthy, and utterly without conscience about how a rival's ruin might serve his own ambitions. He did not yet have proof, but he had a rumour, a clerk willing to talk, and a newspaper editor who owed him a favour. He needed only the right moment to strike. What Julian did not know, what no one in Northumberland knew, save Mrs. Agatha Prynne, sworn to silence over a decade of loyal service, was that Margaret had secrets of her own. Not secrets of shame, secrets of ambition. 2 years into her marriage, restless in a role that asked her to preside over dinners and approve menus, and otherwise exist as ornament to her husband's public life, Margaret had begun, quietly, to invest. Her dowry, technically hers by the marriage settlement, though custom suggested otherwise, had gone not into jewels or gowns, but into small shares of coastal shipping ventures, arranged through a Newcastle broker who did not ask why a woman signed her letters M. Fairweather rather than Duchess of Alderwick. She had a ledger of her own. Hidden in the false bottom of her writing desk, its columns as precise as any steward's, it recorded 3 years of careful, unglamorous success. 2 merchant vessels part-owned, a warehouse lease renegotiated favourably, profits reinvested rather than spent. She had built it for no reason she could fully name, except that she had wanted, once in her life, to prove she could stand on ground she had made herself, rather than ground given to her by a husband's name. She had never told Julian. She had told herself this was no different from what he must be keeping from her. Every man kept something back. She had told herself many things. Now, standing at her window watching rain streak the glass, she understood the difference with sudden, uncomfortable clarity. Her secret harmed no one. His had put the entire estate, tenants, servants, Eleanor, the dock workers whose wages depended on Alderwick's solvency, at risk of collapse, and he had not thought her worth trusting with the truth of it. Across the harbour, in the offices of the Northumberland Courier, Sir Edmund Talbot poured 2 glasses of port and slid one across the desk to an editor who badly needed the money Talbot was offering. "The harbour trade dinner," Talbot said. "Thursday next. All of society will be present. The Duke, the Duchess, half the shipping investors in the county." He smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "A story like this deserves an audience." The editor turned the mortgage documents over in his hands, Julian's near-forged signature catching the lamplight. "You understand," the editor said slowly. "This will ruin him." "Yes," Talbot said, lifting his glass. "That is rather the point." Outside, the storm that had chased Margaret home was finally breaking, but a different storm, quieter and far more dangerous, was only just beginning to gather over Alderwick. By Wednesday, the house had settled into a strange, brittle peace, the kind that comes not from resolution, but from 2 people carefully avoiding the one conversation that mattered. Julian told himself Margaret's coldness was fatigue, or the weather, or nothing at all. He was, Silas Boone reflected privately, a man who could read a shipping manifest at a glance and remain entirely illiterate in the language of his own wife. "Your Grace," Boone said, laying a stack of ledgers on the study desk, "the quarterly accounts don't balance. There's a discrepancy in the Newcastle column, nearly £400, moving in a pattern I don't recognise." Julian did not look up from his correspondence. "I'll review it myself." "I already have, sir. Twice." Boone hesitated, choosing his next words with the caution of a man who valued his position. "It isn't estate spending. The pattern's too regular, too disciplined. Whoever's behind it understands trade far better than any clerk I've hired." Julian's pen stilled. For one unsettling moment, he wondered whether Talbot had already begun bleeding the estate from within, some scheme more sophisticated than a simple leaked mortgage. He dismissed Boone with instructions to say nothing to the household, and sat alone afterward, turning the ledger pages, searching for a villain's hand in figures that were, in truth, his wife's. He did not recognize her handwriting in the coded shorthand she used. He had never once looked closely enough to learn it. Upstairs, Margaret sat with Mrs. Prynne over cooling tea, the fire burning low. "You could tell him," Mrs. Prynne said gently, "about the ledger, before he learns of his own trouble and the household turns to chaos entirely." "Tell him what exactly?" Margaret's voice was quiet, controlled in the way that frightened those who knew her well. "That while he was mortgaging our family's future in secret, I was quietly building one of my own. He would not call it partnership, Agatha. He would call it defiance. Perhaps he would call it clever. Perhaps." Margaret set down her cup. "But I find I no longer wish to guess what my husband would call anything. I would rather know." That evening, at supper, Julian attempted conversation 3 times and received, in return, only precise, courteous replies, the kind Margaret might offer a dinner guest she scarcely knew. It unsettled him more than shouting would have. Shouting, at least, he understood. "Margaret," he set down his fork. "Have I done something to wound you?" She studied him a long moment, long enough that he felt, for the first time in their marriage, genuinely uncertain of what she might say. "I don't yet know the full shape of it," she said finally, "but I intend to find out." She rose before the final course, leaving him alone at a table built for two, in a house that suddenly felt far too large for either of them. 2 days remained until the harbour trade dinner. The harbour trade dinner was, by long tradition, the grandest gathering of Northumberland's shipping society. Investors, captains, magistrates, and their wives assembled beneath the vaulted ceiling of the trade hall, crystal and candlelight glinting off 200 years of maritime fortune. Margaret wore blue silk and a composure she did not feel. Julian, beside her, wore the practiced ease of a man accustomed to command, an ease that would not survive the evening. Sir Edmund Talbot arrived fashionably late, and smiling, he waited until the second course, until the room was warm with wine and conversation, until Julian stood to offer the customary toast to the harbour's continued prosperity, and then he rose as well, glass raised, voice pitched to carry. "Before His Grace continues," Talbot said, "I wonder if he might first explain to this room the nature of a certain mortgage, signed in Newcastle this past March, against Alderwick land, under a signature, that is, shall we say, approximately his own." The hall went silent in the particular way that only genuine scandal produces. Not gasps, but a held breath, 200 people leaning almost imperceptibly forward. "I have the documents here," Talbot continued, drawing folded papers from his coat with theatrical care, should His Grace's memory require assistance. Julian felt the blood leave his face. Beside him, Margaret went very still. "Sir Edmund," Julian began, "this is neither the time." "On the contrary," Talbot said, "I think this is precisely the time. The good people of this harbour deserve to know whether the man who controls their dock leases is a man of his word, or a man who mortgages his family's future in secret and lets his own wife discover it alongside the rest of Northumberland." Every eye in the room moved to Margaret. She did not flinch, though something in her chest had gone cold and hard. A door closing on a room she had not known was still open. She had suspected deception. She had not imagined this. A public unveiling, her ignorance displayed like a d'oeuvre, her marriage dissected over roast pheasant and claret. "Is it true?" she asked Julian, quietly, though the whole room strained to hear. Julian could have lied. He considered it, for one desperate half-second, and understood with sick clarity that a lie now would finish what Talbot had started. "Yes," he said. The word landed like a dropped glass. "I did it to protect Eleanor," he continued, low and urgent, as if speaking only to her might somehow undo the audience around them. "Her husband's debts, she would have lost everything. The scandal would have—" "You decided," Margaret said, "without me, as though I were a child to be shielded, rather than your wife." "Margaret, not here." Her voice did not rise, which was somehow worse than if it had. "You have already made this decision for me once. You will not make this one as well." She set down her napkin, rose with perfect composure, and walked from the trade hall alone, leaving Julian standing before 200 witnesses to his own undoing. And Sir Edmund Talbot, glass still raised, smiling like a man who had finally won a war, 11 years in the making. The house on Curzon Street was silent when Julian returned that night, the kind of silence that felt inhabited rather than empty. He found Margaret's sitting room door locked for the first time in 3 years of marriage. He did not knock. He stood outside it a long while, then went to his study and did not sleep. By morning, the Northumberland Courier had run Talbot's story in full, complete with a reproduction of the disputed signature and a headline that asked, none too subtly, whether a duke who deceived his own duchess could be trusted with a harbour's worth of contracts. Creditors who had extended Alderwick generous terms for 2 generations began, quietly and correctly, to reconsider. Eleanor arrived at midday, ashen, guilt written plainly across her face. Julian, I never asked you to hide it from her. I never wanted. I know, he said. It was my choice. Mine alone. He meant it as reassurance. It came out as confession. He tried to see Margaret 3 times that day. The first time, Mrs. Prynne turned him away, with a politeness that stung worse than anger. The second time, Boone found him a set of harbour authority notices requiring urgent attention. An emergency hearing had been called, prompted by Talbot's allies among the trade commissioners, to determine whether Alderwick's harbour leases should be suspended pending investigation. The third time, near midnight, he found Margaret's door unlocked at last, and Margaret awake, seated at her writing desk, a lamp burning low. She did not turn when he entered. "I am not angry that you made a mistake," she said, before he could speak. "I am angry that you decided, alone, that I was not capable of bearing the truth of it, that you built an entire architecture of secrecy around me, as though I were furniture to be arranged rather than a woman to be consulted. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to control the version of the world you allowed me to see." She finally turned. Her eyes were dry, which frightened him more than tears would have. "Do you know what I have built, Julian, in the years you spent protecting me from your troubles?" He shook his head, genuinely lost. "Nor did you think to ask." She closed the ledger before her, though not before he glimpsed columns of figures in a hand he did not recognize. "The hearing is in 2 days. Talbot means to see the harbour leases stripped from this family entirely, and with them, every tenant's wage, every dockworker's livelihood, everything your father and his father built. Margaret, I have not decided," she said, "whether to help you survive it." She turned back to her desk, and Julian understood, for the first time in his marriage, that he had no argument left that she had not already heard and found wanting. The Harbour Authority hearing convened in the same trade hall where Talbot had staged his triumph, though the crystal was gone now, replaced by hard wooden benches and a panel of grim-faced commissioners. Talbot spoke first, and spoke well, of trust betrayed, of a duke unfit to hold contracts affecting hundreds of working families, of the necessity of transferring the northern dock leases to parties whose dealings bear no shadow of deception. He did not look at Julian while he spoke. He did not need to. The room's mood did the work for him. Julian's defence, when his turn came, was honest and therefore unimpressive. An admission of the mortgage, an explanation of Eleanor's debts, a plea that one concealed obligation, honourably intended, should not condemn an estate with 2 centuries of fair dealing behind it. The commissioners' faces remained unmoved. Honesty after exposure, Julian understood too late, persuades no one. Then Margaret rose. She had not told him she would come. She had not told him what she carried, wrapped in oilcloth beneath her arm, until she set it upon the commissioner's table and opened it. 3 years of ledgers, her ledgers, precise and undeniable. "I am the Duchess of Alderwick," she said, her voice carrying to the hall's furthest corner without rising, "and for 3 years, unknown to my husband, I have independently managed shipping investments, using my own dowry, 2 merchant vessels, a warehouse lease, and capital sufficient, should this panel require proof of Alderwick's financial soundness, to cover any shortfall my husband's mortgage may have created." A murmur moved through the room. Talbot's smile, for the first time, faltered. "I tell you this," Margaret continued, "not to excuse my husband's secrecy, which I do not excuse, and which he and I will address privately, as married partners ought to address such matters, together, from now forward. I tell you this because Sir Edmund Talbot has built his case on the premise that this family conceals dishonesty. I stand before you as proof that what this family has concealed is, in fact, competence, mine as much as any duke's, and I will not see 2 centuries of Alderwick's honest labour stripped from hard-working dockmen because one man wished to punish another over a rivalry 11 years old." She turned, briefly, to Talbot. "You wished for an audience, sir. You have one. I trust they are watching closely." The commissioners retired for 40 minutes. When they returned, the leases remained with Alderwick, provisionally, pending audit, but intact. Talbot left the hall before the ruling finished being read, his allies among the trade commissioners suddenly, conspicuously silent. Julian did not move from his seat for a long moment after, watching his wife accept the quiet nods of men who, an hour before, had been prepared to ruin him. She had not saved him for his sake alone. She had made that unmistakably clear. They did not speak again until the carriage, rain once more streaking the windows in an echo of the storm that had begun it all. "Why did you help me?" Julian asked finally, "when you had every reason not to?" Margaret watched the harbour lights blur past. "I did not do it for you. I did it because I would not let Talbot's ambition cost dock workers their wages to punish your pride. And because," she paused, choosing the words with the same care she gave her ledgers, "because I have spent 3 years proving to myself that I am capable of standing on my own ground. I did not need to prove it to that room by watching my family collapse." "I was wrong," Julian said. "Not only in the mortgage, in believing protection meant deciding for you rather than beside you. Yes, I am asking you to forgive me. I know I have not yet earned it." "No," Margaret agreed. "You haven't." She turned to face him fully. "But I am willing to let you try, on different terms than before. There will be no more ledgers I do not see, Julian, and none of mine hidden from you either. I want a partner, not a protector, and not a man I must forgive twice a year for the same offence in different clothing." "Agreed," he said, and meant it more completely than he had meant any vow since their wedding day. The carriage rolled on through the rain toward Alderwick, where Eleanor waited with an apology of her own, and Boone had already begun drafting new accounting procedures, ones with 2 signatures required on every page. It was not the ending of a fairy tale. It was, Margaret thought, watching Julian's hand find hers in the dark, something sturdier,